Welcome to another episode of Gen Z in Manufacturing, a podcast where I interview young people about their journeys in the manufacturing industry. For this episode, I welcome Danea Buschkoetter, a 27-year-old lead welding instructor at Cloud County Community College. Buschkoetter attended welding school to get her certification and later earned a bachelor's degree in applied technology with an emphasis in manufacturing. She worked as a welder fabricator, a design engineer/draftsman, a project manager, and a millwright before becoming a welding instructor and most recently a lead instructor. Buschkoetter was also recognized by SME as one of the 2023 30 Under 30 honorees. Before we hear from Buschkoetter, please make sure to like and share this episode of Gen Z Manufacturing. To view previous episodes, visit IEN.com. If you are a member of Gen Z and would like to discuss your experience in the manufacturing industry, please get in touch with me, Nolan Beilstein, at nolan@IEN.com. Before we get started, we would like to thank our sponsor, Red Zone. Empower your front line while growing your bottom line. QAD Red Zone is the #1 connected workforce solution for plants of all sizes. It's time for manufacturers to start engaging their frontline employees, resulting in reduced turnover and increased productivity. Red Zone enables you to stop analyzing yesterday and start solving today's problems now. For the first time ever, production, maintenance, and quality teams are following the same playbook. Well, Danea, thank you for joining Gen Z in Manufacturing. My first question for you was, after attending welding school and a university, what can you say that each institution offers to Gen Zs that are interested in pursuing manufacturing?
Yeah, so when it comes to the technical side of things, when I went and got my welding certificate, that was more of my hands-on training, my hands-on experience that I gained. But when I got my bachelor's degree, that's when I got more into like the technical side of things, more into like the engineering and design aspect of things. So it kind of depends on what side of manufacturing you want to be in. So if you want to be, on the floor producing the product, I would recommend, a technical college or a community college. And if you're, looking to be more maybe in upper management or even in the design side of things, I would recommend, that bachelor's degree.
And from all your experiences in the industry, which role prior to your educational roles do you think contributed most to your growth?
I would say probably when I was being a millwright, so working on, grain handling facilities, stuff like that, it was oftentimes always problem solving. So that always put me into, an uncomfortable situation that, I didn't know what to expect when I showed up to work every single day. From there, I was able to grow, my mentality and all of the knowledge that I knew about the industry because I was having to think on my feet. So,
what inspired you to transition to the teaching role?
I would say if you would have asked me, 5 years ago, if I would have been a teacher, I would have flat out told you no. It was one of those situations where I was working as a millwright at that point, and it was in April, and I can remember this day vividly, but I, went home from work that day and got an email from corporate saying that the company had went into receivership, which was totally unexpected, especially with the jobs that we had just bid out and, completed. And so at that point, my welding instructor of where I went to school at for my welding certificate had kind of reached out to me and let me know that the other instructor was leaving. So, before I even knew that that was my last day of work as a millwright, I already had kind of contemplated being a teacher, but I didn't know if that was my avenue. But I would say, getting that email, that was kind of the light that I needed, I guess, to pursue education. Because at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. It was going to require me moving regardless. And so I took the opportunity because, I didn't know what it was going to bring. And so I gave it a shot. And here we are, 5 years into teaching. So
after you decided to move on to the teaching role and not so much field work with the welding shortage, how do you evaluate personally being in the workforce versus training prospective welders to help with the labor shortage?
I feel like being an educator, I can make a greater impact on the welder shortage because I'm obviously training welders to go out into the industry to help that. Whereas if I was out in the industry, it would be just myself. I'm very active on social media on promoting, skilled trades and that there's a shortage across all skilled trades. And so I feel like I said, if I wasn't in the education role, I wouldn't be able to make as big of an impact rather than being out in industry.
How do you sell welding school to prospective students? What do you tell them to get them excited about it?
I would say it honestly kind of varies on the type of student. So usually I, have a pretty general conversation with them at the beginning, kind of get to know the student or the individual and kind of go from there. I like to, talk about all of the different avenues. So like I've been in all kinds of different things within the welding, industry, and just all the different avenues they can go. Everything has some form of welding in it, whether, you're in the manufacturing industry, you're in, the oil and gas industry, you're in automotive. I mean, there's just so many different industries that require welding. And so I always ask students or individuals, like, name 5 things that, you were around today that was welded. And I mean, that kind of opens their minds up to how how much of a need there is for welders. And like, I always like to mention, like, if you get bored doing one certain type of welding, there's so many different processes and avenues that they can go, and to not necessarily give up, after they've done that one process and they're tired of it, they can always go and try a different industry within the welding industry.
What misconceptions do students in your class initially have about welding and manufacturing?
I mean, there's been a lot that I've been around. With me being a female, I would say that would be one misconception, that women, can't be in the industry. And I've even had some male students come into my classroom and kind of hesitate me instructing them until, I sit down or I walk in their booth and I'm like, this is how you do it. And then, their eyes kind of, open up, and then they kind of gain that trust from me. So, I mean, that's probably been one of my misconceptions that I've been around. There's always the people think that you can make all this money, or you're going to go out and make those 6-figure jobs right off the bat. But oftentimes those 6-figure jobs are, requiring 7-day work weeks. You're working 10, 12-hour days. You're not home. You're traveling. I mean, you can make a good salary, and don't get me wrong. But like I said, just that 6-figure salary is what takes the hard work and time to achieve.
Do you think that Gen Z aged people are well equipped to handle those 7-day long hour work weeks? I know there's kind of been a push where your job's not supposed to occupy your entire life. So how do you think Gen Z can handle a situation like that?
I mean, even if they're not equipped with it right off the bat, I feel like if they saw the end game, or, saw what they're going to be able to achieve if they work that hard, I think that would push. But again, it really is just dependent on the person. And even being an instructor, I mean, I have some students that are really, really good that I can see doing really well in the industry. And then I have some that, it takes a little bit more work. So I would say not every individual is equipped with that to be able to do that. So
do you foresee employers having to change the hours expected for those high wage jobs to accommodate more young workers and young talent?
I would say it really depends on the industry. In the welding community, there's a lot of old school industries. And so for them to change takes a lot. So I think it would still even be a little bit before, those jobs that do have those 6 figures, take a step back and look at, the quality, of life that individual needs to have to work for their company. And I mean, a lot of those individuals that work for those companies that are in that situation, they often know what is required of them to work there. So I would say it's going to take a little bit, but I mean, overall, I can see the industry, it's slowly kind of getting out of that old school mentality, but it's still there. So
how have you had to tailor your lessons over the years to keep students engaged?
I'm honestly constantly changing. Before, I was teaching more of like, all right, you're going to do this position, flat, horizontal, vertical, overhead, what have it. And I'm changing more into a project-based learning. So they're actually getting something, or, a result with what they're welding, rather than just welding, 6-inch coupons over and over again. They actually physically have something that they made, at the end of their project or whatever. And so I think that is one way I've been changing, because students nowadays, if they don't see like an end result or any progression or anything of that nature, they oftentimes struggle to continue. And so or even to get any, form of validation. They need that validation to keep going. And I think part of that's because of social media and all of that. They get that instant gratification. And so before, I did those coupons over and over again. And over time, the student, like I said, has just lost interest. And so more of the project-based learning to get that instant gratification. Okay, I built this. I got a result with it. I'm always, even with, the things that I've gone on, I'm always constantly changing. And, one year something might work here for these students, but then the next year I have a whole different group of students, a whole different, type of learner. And so again, it's always just kind of a see if this works. If it doesn't work, try this kind of thing. So constantly changing.
What skills do you emphasize the most to your students that you insist they need to have whenever they go to get a professional job?
Communication, that's another thing that, obviously, even if you're not in the welding industry, being an effective communicator is also needed. I've also found with my younger students, them even being able to read an email or check an email or compose an email, any of those things they struggle with. So with me, rather than them, knowing my office phone number, any of that, I just give them strictly my email. So they have to communicate with me through email. And so those are some of the things that I encourage other than just welding in my class.
Does it help that you are also a Gen Z teacher instructing Gen Z students? Do you feel like you can reach them more easily?
Yes, 100%. So when I was in my last position, I was teaching with an older gentleman, and I oftentimes kind of felt that I had a better understanding of those students. I was more understanding if they were going through something. I understood like how to kind of open those students up, to be able to communicate with me. So it's most definitely helped. But then I've also had students that are older than me, and it's kind of been a little bit of a battle. But then, once I start talking and start helping them and start instructing them, they, quickly learn that I do know what I'm talking about. So, yeah.
And how can those older generations have a better way to bridge a generational gap when working with younger workers?
I would say the biggest thing is being open-minded. Obviously, we weren't all, we don't all grow up in the same era and the same upbringing. And so being able to be, I guess, an open ear would be one thing, because oftentimes older generations are so closed-minded, and obviously different generations are going to have different ways to process things. And so if those older generations, like I said, can just be more open-minded and willing to listen, and not necessarily always have to be heard, I think that would kind of help bridge that gap that we have.
What developments do you foresee in the welding industry as far as technology goes?
It's hard to follow all the technology that's going on, but that's probably one of the biggest ones is automation. Within automation is the cobots are kind of taking over the space, and people think that's scary, but they're like, oh, it's gonna, robots are gonna take our jobs. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because you still have to have those people that put the parts in the robot, program the robot, all of that. So that job's still going to be there. It's just really cool to see, kind of how those roles have changed to where it was, you had to have programming knowledge to program those robots, but now you really just need the welding knowledge to understand what the program or the robot needs to know to program the robot. So.
And how do you think Gen Z will influence the welding industry as more of them join the workforce?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say we're probably more technology, honestly, is probably going to get more incorporated within welding. Even like our welders are changing. We have more digital interfaces than we had before. I would just say the technology, honestly, is probably going to continue to advance and be more technical as the time goes on. And, maybe even research on using other materials that are more readily available than others. And it'll be interesting to see where the welding industry goes in the next several years.
You touched on it a little bit, but could you elaborate a little more on what kind of challenges you've had to face as a woman in welding and manufacturing?
Yeah, so when I first started in the welding industry, I was one of the only females I knew in my area growing up in South Central Nebraska and going to school in North Central Kansas, I didn't really have any other females in my industry or even like the same things that I did. And so it's been a battle. Like when I was going through welding school, I was the only female in my class, and I was having to deal with some sexual harassment stuff. And so that kind of molded me and got me some thicker skin as I went through school. But I mean, I've even faced it while I was applying for jobs. Now, I can't exactly say this is the reason I wasn't given this job, but I had an internship as a project manager, and throughout that, I, got offered a full-time interview. And in that interview, I, asked if I could go on steel crew because they were asking me what I wanted to do. And, being in the project management side of things, you see where you're short people, and told them I wanted to be steel crew and then work up to a steel superintendent, and they declined. And that was probably the best interview I've ever had in my entire life. I really liked the company, but then my manager came back to me a couple days later and was like, well, if you would have interviewed for the position you had during the summer in the office being a project manager, you probably would have got the job. And so that was probably one of the biggest hurdles, being a female, and then just being in, leadership roles where individuals don't take you seriously. And like I've been in situations where people come up to asking for help or asking for the supervisor, and I'm like, I can help you with that answer, and it just kind of takes them back. But I've been able to find other females, in the industry through social media and stuff that has really helped me grow as a person and an individual, and it's helped me, being able to vent with other females that understand what I'm going through. So
what do you tell young women who are looking to come into this field and knowing what they're getting into in that regard?
Having other females in your corner is great, but it's also good to have those other males in your corner as well, to be mentors, because obviously there's not going to be a female that's been in every single position that's in, welding. And so I've been able to find some mentors that were males that, have helped me through those times, have maybe helped me understand why something's going the way it's going. And so
what can employers do to encourage more women to get into this field?
I would say employers to be somewhat open-minded. When it comes to welding, we have a lot of, PPE, personal protective equipment. And oftentimes that seems to be one of the biggest hurdles women face in the industry, is not having proper fitting equipment and, protective clothing and such, like gloves and all of that. So maybe even have some open ears if they're going to hire a female. Step back and look at, how their shops ran. Is there, a place, women's restroom, even stuff like that, and have some system in place to where if one of your current employees is, disrespecting your female, making sure like you've got some sort of policy there, stuff like that. And just kind of be open-minded, I guess, especially if it's one of their very first females in the setting. Maybe ask what they need to be successful in their job and stuff like that.
How do you promote diversity in your classes?
Well, first off, me being a female in the industry, I think it kind of helps, especially my male students, understand or, get used to having a female in their space. That's one thing I've always told my students, how you should not talk to females, especially in the, the workplace setting. And so, like I said, being a female instructor, they're already introduced to that. And I hope that me being a female in the instructor position, I always hope that helps encourage ladies that are maybe scared to try welding, getting into the industry. I guess I would say if anyone's interested in the welding industry, go and find maybe even a short-term class in your area. Go give it a shot. Or even if you have a friend that has a welder, go and spark an arc and see if that, ignites something in you and a passion in you that you didn't know you have.
Thank you for watching this episode of Gen Z in Manufacturing. Please make sure to like and share this episode. To view previous episodes, visit IEN.com. If you are a member of Gen Z and would like to discuss your experience in the manufacturing industry, please contact Nolan Beilstein at nolan@IEN.com.